Hi, this is Misha, and this is not an SKS. This is a Czech Vz.52 self-loading rifle, chambered for the 7.62 by 45 millimeter Czech or CZ or Bruno cartridge. Now we've done other videos on Czech firearms such as the Vz.58, Vz.75, and the CZ805 Bren, so you probably noticed by now that the Czechs really like to do things their own way. They've had a booming little small arms development, not just manufacturing, but actual development industry since they became an independent nation after World War I. And this is one of their first creations under communism. After World War II, Czechoslovakia, the military, was equipped with kind of a hodgepodge of weapons. They had a lot of German guns, K98s and K43s left over because of Germany occupying the nation, so they used those in frontline service in the 40s. They also had quite a few Mosin Nagants that were given to them by the Soviet Union. So three different basic guns with a lot of small ones also in service. Well, by the late 40s, they didn't want to do this. They wanted to have a standard issue weapon, a more modern weapon, and they developed this 7.62 by 45 cartridge. Now, it wasn't really based on the Soviet 7.62 by 39 round. More, it was based on the 7.92 by 33 Kurs used in the MP44. Well, the first prototypes of these appeared at CZ in 1949, known as the CZ49-3, and then the next prototype series was known as the CZ502, and that's pretty much what went into production in 1952. So this became the standard issue rifle, infantry rifle of the Czech People's Army in 1952. So what is it? Well, it's a pretty typical self-loading rifle for the day, but it's definitely its own design. They kind of borrowed a lot, and unfortunately I won't be able to show you a lot on camera because this thing is not always the easiest to completely disassemble. But it is a self-loading rifle, has a reciprocating cocking handle here. As you can see, it does have a last round bolt hole open. It feeds from a 10-round detachable mag, and the bolt stays back after the mag's out. It uses an M1 Grand style trigger group. In fact, it actually removes the same way. The trigger guard actually pivots forward, and then you can pull it out of the stock and then take the rest of the gun out of the stock. So that's kind of neat. To disassemble it, you slide this forward, and then it comes off. But this spring's under a lot of tension, so I'm not going to do it. It has one major recoil spring there. This top handguard I can take off very easily to get to the gas system. You just squeeze it there. And that actually ends up giving you an annular piston around the barrel. Gas comes through a port, and then it pushes back on this here, and that pushes back on the carrier. Back. You can see there's a little fork that comes out here. It's very short recoil. It just has these two spikes here that come out and hit. One right here if you can see. They just hit the bolt carrier. But that's pretty much the operation. So it's easy to get to the gas system. Has a 20.5 inch barrel. It is threaded with their movable muzzle cap here. This one's missing the front sight protector, but there's usually a loop front sight protector here. Has a fold-out bayonet. Obviously it folds from the side. Lightweight spike there. I didn't get that on. I'll have to do that right. These were fitted with either walnut early on or beech later stocks. Most of the 52s I've seen have the walnut style, but it can be either or. Nice solid stock here. It has this butt plate has a spring-loaded catch, then it pulls off and you can store a cleaning kit inside. It's a typical sling on it. Anyway, these were manufactured from 1952 until 1957. They were a good rifle, but politics got in the way. The the Soviet Union didn't like that Czechoslovakia had made its own rifle round, 7.62 by 45 again. Even though it was more long-ranged and accurate than theirs, they wanted everyone to standardize, so they started putting a lot of pressure on the Czechs, and eventually they caved in. They eventually decided to go to something else, and so they had to drop this rifle in this round. This round was only ever used in this rifle here and also the Vz.52 light machine gun. This particular example was made in 1954 by CZ, or Bruden. It has they use the code SHE. They made the majority of these. About 150,000 Vz.52s were produced. Also, there were two other factories that I'm not even going to try to pronounce. You can look at our blog article for those, but one of them used the code RID and the other one used the code AYM, but they produced these in much smaller numbers than CZ did. So yeah, this is a very mid-production example of a Vz.52 in quite good shape. You'll see some of these that have black stocks. That's because Century Arms, the importer, put a truck bed liner on them because the stocks were beat up. You'll basically see guns like this in really nice shape, and those came out of Europe, or pretty well used and beat up, and those tended to come out of South America and Africa and whatnot, where they really saw service. So there's you'll either see these in really good shape or really not good. You'll also see some where they put a little ring in the chamber to try to convert them into firing 7.62 by 39. Those rings were just Loctited in. I would personally not advise you shooting those because the rings do tend to come out eventually as heat builds up and the Loctite breaks. But, you know, your own choice there, but I wouldn't advise it. If you're going to get one of these, just try to find the original ammo. There's a lot of surplus out there, and you can do it. Nice trigger on this, by the way, and it has a Garand style safety along with the Garand style trigger group. But yeah, these were used by the Czech military. These were also used by Cuba, and quite a few were also sent over to Vietnam, and several were sent to communist allies in South America and Africa. So they got out around a little bit. Some of these were encountered by U.S. soldiers when they were fighting in Grenada in the 80s. So you can see some vet bringbacks of those. They came back from there. Well, our next rifle in the series is something very, very similar, but just a smidge different. This is the Vz.52's successor, the Vz.52-57. Now, really all this is the same rifle, but reworked to fire 7.62 by 39. As I was saying, politics played a major role, and by 1955, the Czech military and CZ was starting to kind of cave, and they decided to adopt the standard Soviet round. So they reworked their guns. Now, they did not actually rebarrel any original 52s to this new cartridge, to the Soviet round. These were all purpose-built. So there are a few minor changes. For one, the barrels are actually pinned into the receiver. You can see the hole here. They're pressed and pinned like on an AK, or AKM I should say to be exact. Where there is on the original one, they were screwed in. Also, most of these have a more of a paint over phosphate finish, whereas the 52s just had more of a phosphate. These could have walnut or beech stocks as well, but most of them had the beech. This one here does have the front sight protectors, you can see. It also acts as a retainer for the thread protector, the muzzle cap. Same folding bayonet. Kind of a neat bayonet, honestly. Same disassembly and so on and so forth. So very, very similar weapon. These were in production from 1957 until 1959 at CZ exclusively. At least I haven't seen any made elsewhere. So I think most all of these were made at CZ. About 100,000 of these were produced, and they were just really a temporary measure. when these were in production, the Vz.58 assault rifle was undergoing final trials, so they knew this wouldn't be in service for very long. So these were in frontline service very briefly, and then they were retired to second line reserve units. And actually they were used by guards. A lot of guards used them for ceremonial, because they look better for ceremonial purposes than the Vz.58, which is obviously smaller, less wood, and all that stuff. The two guns used very similar magazines. In fact, they're interchangeable, but the one for this has a slightly different taper for 100% reliable feeding of 7.62 by 39. You can put a 7.62 by 45 mag in it, and it'll work reasonably well, say 85–90% of the time. But for 100% reliability, they reshape the bottom of the mag, and yeah. But yeah, these were in service quite briefly before being phased out in Czechoslovakia. But as with the Vz.52 before it, quite a few of these 57s were sent over to Cuba, and they were also encountered in Grenada and Vietnam by U.S. soldiers. And they actually got out even more than the 52. If you look at the list of people who used them, it's a little bit larger. I'm sure it was because it fired a more standard caliber for that era. Very well-made guns, very reliable and accurate. On the other hand, they were rather expensive to produce, and they are kind of fiddly to completely field strip and disassemble. Like getting to the gas system up here is easy, but past that, it's kind of like a grand. You have to pull the trigger group out, take the stock off, and then once you get past that, getting the bolt out and everything. Oh, speaking of the bolt, and I forgot to mention this, it is a tipping or tilting bolt. But unlike most tipping or tilting bolts, it actually locks in the front, not the back. You know, like on an FAL or an SVT, it's gonna lock in the back. This one actually tips down in the front and locks that way. So minor mechanical difference, but it is kind of interesting if you're a big gun nerd. But yeah, this is the Vz.52-57, and quite an interesting thing. Again, often kind of mistaken or overlooked for a SKS, but it's not. It's a unique Czech design, and has their typical stamp of quality and high degree of engineering. Well, if you have any questions or comments, please post them below. And as always, this is Misha, and thanks for tuning in.